Welcome to Snow The Goalie. It's a beautiful day for some Flyers off-season hockey talk. But first, my dear friend and colleague, Anthony SanFilippo, who you can find on Twitter at AntSanPhilly. Anthony, how are you?
I couldn't be better, Russ. Whatever happened to spring, man? We went straight from winter right into summer. I mean, I'm not complaining. The weather right now is perfect. It's beautiful. We'll walk outside in T-shirt and shorts in the very beginning of May. But we went right from like frigid cold right to this. There was no enjoyable spring.
I don't mind at all. I'm allergic to nature, so spring is not a good time for me. So by all means, if we just want to get rid of some of the transitional, seasons, that's okay. Although I do like fall. Fall's fine. Ragweed sucks, but like fall is great. Spring,
You're allergic to nature? So
I am. I get allergy shots, man. Oh,
you like Bubble Boy, man? You need to stay inside entirely?
If I go like lay out on a lawn, it's all over for me, man. Like I'm gonna be covered in a rash. I'm gonna look like I have the plague. It's not good. It is not good.
My son is like that. He can't go out into the grass. But I figure, that's one thing. If you're allergic to like whatever's in the grass, I get it. But yeah,
trees, it's bad.
Yeah,
like how do you end up allergic to a tree, and like how do you find out? It's not like you like go straight up Baloo from the Jungle Book and like rub your back on there to like to scratch your back, right? No. You get the allergy test, and they're like, "Hey, here are all the trees in nature. You're allergic to all of them very badly." It's like, good thing I wasn't planning on eating some bark.
Well, you know what? I can't tell you how many times over the years that I would end up going to the doctor after, and the doctor would be like, "Well, where were you?" And I'm like, "No, really nowhere. I mean, I'm just back and forth." And he say, keep forgetting you're in those hockey locker rooms. He said it's like a petri dish in there. And he says it's the worst. It's like one of the worst places. Sports locker rooms are like one of the worst places for illnesses to be born in, and for stuff to come from because of all the molding and sweat and everything. It's awful. So so we put ourselves at risk for the benefit of the fan.
I just want to thank you for
going
your
into those locker rooms.
Thank you for that, Mr. SanFilippo. You're putting your health on the line, and you've got a family. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. We already went off the rails 30 seconds into the show.
That's fine. It's off season. It's off season and off the rails. Life is good.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know where you want to start with this today, but Flyers Media Day happened, and I don't know if you want to get to. Should we talk about the Giroux piece really quick?
Yeah, we can. I mean, I know
the Giroux hit piece.
I know it's a week old, Russ. I mean, the funny thing is that we recorded, I think last week. Tuesday night, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah.
Yeah. So like we had just come off Game 6, and the Flyers breakup day was on Wednesday. So we had recorded the night before all this craziness happened. So Wednesday was the Giroux thing. Thursday was the Hextall thing. I'm like sitting there like, wow, we recorded 2 days too soon. Like this was all stuff that we needed to talk about. So yeah, we are a little bit behind with it, but just the timing element of it. But nevertheless, I mean, it has to be talked about, and it's got to be talked about in a smart manner, because I think what ends up happening is when that stuff happens, everybody gets reactionary, right? And everybody wants to respond right away. Everybody wants to kill the writer. Everybody wants to scream at Hextall. Everybody wants to scream at Giroux because nobody knows what's what, and nobody can like really interpret what is being said. And I figure now here we are 6-7 days later, we can look at it with a more measured eye and be able to tell people exactly what was being said and what the thought was behind everything. And I think maybe they'll get a better understanding of where everything lies with this Flyers team at this point.
Let's pull back that curtain. So I guess to add a little bit of context here. So Marcus Hayes wrote an article April 25th. Claude Giroux admits booing fans hurt Flyers in NHL playoffs. Now, if you listen to the entire clip of the questions that were asked to Giroux, he was talking the way that I took it was he was saying that, the way that fans react in Philadelphia, can apply pressure. And it's not a bad pressure necessarily, but when you're on the power play and the fans are yelling at you to shoot, it can get you out of your game plan. Whereas on the road, they don't have to face that because nobody really cares what they do on the road. You're the away team. The crowd is barreling in on their own home team. And somehow Marcus Hayes took this as, it's not that it takes them out of the swing of things. It's that the booing hurt their feelings. And he wrote this entire, like, this massive article where I think he took a very mundane line and blew it up into this, I would call it a character hit piece. It was a way that, sports talk radio finally brought up the Flyers, and you had like a bunch of people just react to it without ever paying attention to the quote. I mean, I think it's Brandon Lee Gouton, I think, is the one on Twitter who has the pinned tweet that says the rules for responding to a tweet: 1, look at the headline; 2, definitely don't read the article; 3, comment. And that to me is kind of what this whole thing was, except instead of it being, something where the fans were just going out on this like wacky idea, a columnist decided to do that and just picked one little part of a quote, built an entire narrative, and then you started this debate off of something that really was not meant to be a hit in any way.
Right, and I want to get into the genesis of the column in a minute, but I want to address exactly how you described it there, because you did a great job describing it there, Russ, because that's exactly what Claude Giroux was saying. I mean, did he say what he said? 100%. And Marcus puts the quote out there on Twitter. And, everybody was questioning saying that he was cherry picking the quote. He didn't necessarily cherry pick the quote. His quote, he put the quote exactly as it was. He didn't cut it short on Twitter anyway. He put the entire quote out on Twitter. So it was all there. The thing is that you got to understand when athletes are talking, these guys are not classical orators, okay? So you have to interpret sometimes what they are saying and how they are saying it. So when you hear Giroux sit there and say, first of all, it was a leading question by Sam Carchidi in a lot of ways. I don't think Sam was trying to get Giroux to say something negative about the fans, but it was certainly a leading question. And you ask any player in any sport professionally with the difference between playing at home and playing on the road, and they will tell you, and with all honesty, that they prefer playing on the road because there is less of a pressure to perform. They feel like they can play the style of their game without having to worry about impressing anybody. And you can ask again, like I said, any sport. This is not just germane to hockey. So when Giroux says what he says, he's being honest and say he's not blaming the fans. He's saying, yeah, look, you know what? The fans get on us. And then rather than stay within ourselves and stay within the game plan that we have, we sometimes, try and do too much, basically, and try just to, give them what they want. And it's not like a planned thing. It's not like they're sitting there on the bench saying, "Oh, they're yelling at us to shoot. Let's shoot, guys." That's not what it is. It's very subconscious. Okay, and I would think anybody at their job, whatever our jobs are, would perform in that capacity. If we had a bunch of fans sitting here yelling at us, if we were on a live remote and a bunch of fans were sitting there yelling at us to talk about something specific, eventually we would talk about what they want us to talk about, right? I mean, that's just the nature of it, because you want to entertain, you want to inform, you want to do your job for the people, provide the service that you want to provide. And so I think that's what Giroux ultimately is saying. It's not something that they sit there and say, "Oh, well, we hear it and we know the fan." It's very, very subconscious. So I think that that's exactly what it was, and it was kind of innocuous and got turned into something a lot more by Marcus. So nailed that. You nailed that.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for that. I don't know. It's a troubling trend of Marcus Hayes' off-season columns. On April 10th of 2017, he wrote an article all about why the Flyers should trade Claude Giroux and how they screwed up by not trading him at the end of 2015. And he called him a scratch and dent Ferrari because of all the injuries. I don't know. Like, I think, it's crossing broad, so, I think we inherently, or people at the site inherently kind of go after Marcus and things that he writes, because it's kind of low-hanging fruit in a lot of cases where I don't really ever seem to agree with many of his opinions on sports. And I think a lot of times in this newspaper industry, dying newspaper industry, sports section, not holding the prestige it once did kind of world we live in, I think a lot of these guys, feel like they could do a normal game write-up and maybe do a decent job, but they'd rather, stir up some crap and get some page views and really get some conversation going, which to some extent is okay. I mean, sports radio hosts do that kind of stuff all the time. I mean, if you watch or listen to the national guys like a Colin Cowherd, say, Philadelphia, you've been writing in first class for a while, but you're going back to coach. Like, everybody knows that that's just a ploy to get Philadelphia fans in, listening to his clips, listening to his show, trying to engage him on Twitter. And, that kind of makes him a genius. But this kind of thing that Marcus Hayes tends to do, especially when it comes to hockey, I find just infuriating in a lot of ways. And it doesn't feel like he was trying to do justice by the player, the team, or the fans. It felt like almost he had this personal axe that he wanted to grind. Like he came up with this idea for what a column could have been, and the second that a quote was put out there that could have been misconstrued or put into the framing of this idea he's been holding all season, that's when he was going to finally put pen to paper. And I think that's what bothers me the most.
Okay, and that's fair. And so now let me say, obviously, I want to put this caveat out first, because unlike most of the people on our on our website and on our network, I don't have this bitter dislike for Marcus. I actually like Marcus. He's a friend of mine. Whenever we're at games at the same time, we usually hang out and talk and really just kind of have a good conversation. And I don't always agree with him, but Marcus is paid to be a columnist, and the columnist's job is to offer an opinion, sometimes a minority opinion, and to generate conversation. That is the inherent job of a columnist in a newspaper. Now, can you sit there and say that sometimes the takes are incredibly ridiculous? Yes, but if you're asked to write, so many columns a year, occasionally you're going to hit that. Occasionally you're going to push a button that you probably shouldn't have pushed, or take something a little bit further than you probably should have with your opinion. And that's just the nature of it. I mean, I'll tell you, as someone who has been a columnist before, that can happen, and you just get caught up in the in what you're doing for your job, and you try and be, this opinionated person. And sometimes, you're like, well, what angle am I going to go with here? Well, let me try this one. And it ends up being way too wide an angle. Okay. So, it can happen. That said, prior to game 6, Marcus is at game 6, and I walk into the building and I see him. And of course I go over and we start talking, and we ended up having lunch in the media room, together prior to the game. And while we're there, we're talking about a million different things, not just hockey, other sports as well. But the conversation comes up about, we're talking about Ivan Provorov, and the fact that he was going to play, and that his arm is falling off, and this is kind of crazy. And Marcus goes on what I thought was an actually pretty solid rant about how this kid at age 20, just turned 21, is a real leader in the locker room, and should be recognized as such. No one's really recognizing Provorov as a leader, and he made great points. And this is at lunch. This is not something he's written, right? So he's talking about how great of a leader he is, how he should be captain one day. Okay, great. I said to him, Marcus, that sounds like a column. He had like a really nice argument for it. But then he goes on. Then he takes that the next step, and he's like, "What I like about Provorov is that he is a command, respect, team first, kind of wear your heart on the sleeve, kind of emotional leader." He says, and that's what's been missing here. This is what he's saying. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And he's like, well, he says, look at all the captains that that we've had in the past and why they were successful as captains. And he says, they got he actually picked out Pronger, for example. And he says, the one thing with Pronger is that he got it. Like, he understood what the the job entailed from a public perspective, and how he had to take a lot of responsibility on himself, and this and that, and like really make it easier on the team. And he's just going off on this stuff. And he sits there and he says, Giroux's never been that kind of guy. And I said to him, I said, well, no. I said, Claude is not the kind of guy who's going to go out and be the the voice, public voice. He's never been a good talker. He's a quieter guy. I said, but Giroux is well respected in that locker room. I mean, he's looked upon as the leader of this team. He calls team meetings, and he is, all these young kids really respect the hell out of him, and they do. I mean, there's no question about it. And I said, a lot of what Giroux's captaincy is not seen by the public. His captaincy is his play on the ice, and he's been as consistent as hell this year, and really good. And secondly, the quieter stuff that's not reported on because it takes place behind closed doors. I said, so that's what makes him a good captain. And he's like, well, I just think that a captain in hockey needs to be more out there for his team. It needs to take more responsibility, say some more things, be more of a public face. And that's his take on it. And that's fine. But the thing that bothered me about the article, and this is the reason I tell this story, is because this conversation that we had, just the two of us sitting there at lunch, led to the column that turned out to be on Wednesday. It really did, because if the Flyers don't lose Game 6, that column's not being written Wednesday. But Marcus had it in his head that Claude Giroux's not a good enough captain, and if he can find any way to show, listen, this is why he's not a good enough captain, then he was going to do it. And so the fact that they lost the playoff series, Giroux was a -10, didn't have a great series, and not plus minus is really an irrelevant stat in hockey, but that's okay. He's -10. It didn't have a great series, and then he comes out and says something that's not really inflammatory, but if you kind of take it out of context, it can be seen as a little bit inflammatory. And so it was a perfect storm for him, and he writes this column. And guess what? People are going to agree with him, because there are people out there in Flyerdom who feel this, who think Giroux is not a good captain. And I will submit to each and every one of them that they are wrong, that they are silly to think that. I will tell you that I know for a fact, just from talking to people, how good of a leader he is in that locker room. And I don't think there's another player on this team, and I disagree with Marcus. He said he would give it to Provorov or Simmons ahead of Giroux. He said he also was a believer that Kimmo Timonen should have been the captain back in the day instead of Giroux. And I understand why that is, but because Kimmo was another well-respected locker room guy. But I'll tell you right now that the best player on this team and the best leader on this team is Claude Giroux in that locker room, and it's not even a question. So anybody out there who thinks that they know better because they're basing it off of a 6-game performance against the Penguins is completely wrong. And I can't be any more blunt about it. And I'm critical of this team top to bottom as often as I can be when they deserve it. This is not a place to criticize them. Claude Giroux is a good captain and should remain captain of this team for the foreseeable future.
It's unprecedented conceptually, right? If for some reason Dave and Ron decided that they wanted to go a different direction at captain, it's unprecedented.
Let me stop you for 1 second.
I know they won't.
I love that you call them Dave and Ron. I have to think about it for a second because I never refer to them as their first names. It's always Hexy and Hack. You go Dave and Ron. I'm like, who the hell is he talking about?
I think it makes them sound a little bit more sophisticated, to be honest. It sounds like they own a flower shop together, and that's fine. Dave and Ron's Flowers. Hello, how are you, Dave and Ron's?
Anyway, I didn't mean to derail the conversation. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. They're going to sponsor our podcast from now on. Dave and Ron's Flowers, available in Voorhees, New Jersey. Give them a call. They'll give you 10% off if you admit that you're a stupid Flyers fan. All right. The idea of in hockey as a whole, not just the Flyers, but the concept of agreeing with a player to hand the C off to someone else. It strikes me as a rarity, and it strikes me as more of an emasculation than it would anything else. Is there ever a time that you think it's appropriate, in theory, to, I don't want to say remove it, because if you're saying that you're removing or stripping the captain of that title, it sounds like it's, because you don't believe in the guy. But at some point, does it make sense? Say we're 2-3 years down the line, and you think that Provorov really has stepped up and become this fantastic vocal leader, and you kind of want him to usher in the next this next crop, this next generation of Flyer. Is that a point where the conversation is had between the captain and the front office to say, you know what, like, let's hand this over? Or is it something where, like, if you think Provorov is going to be that guy, he gets to wear the A, and then when Giroux eventually moves on, then you kind of promote him to the C?
Yeah, and I think that your second scenario is more likely. That's kind of the way you do it, because that way you're right. It is a little bit emasculating to take the C away from somebody and give it to somebody else. I mean, the last time that happened here was when they took it away from Lindros, right? And that was all and that was so petty. So, but here's my philosophy on it. Like, I don't think it's that big a friggin' deal.
The C?
Yeah, it's not.
It's the biggest deal in hockey. What are you talking about? Come on. Jason Smith, man. Jason Smith, 07, 08, he wore that C. Okay, that defined a career.
Yeah,
and there was also about the same time there was also a mediocre Jason Smith who was like a 7-foot guy that played for the Sixers. Wasn't very good.
Yes, there was.
Sad.
Yeah, no, look, it's a thing. It's a hockey thing. I mean, you don't really talk about captains in other sports, right? I mean, we don't really talk about them, but each team kind of has their leaders in their locker room, and it's never just one guy. So in hockey, yeah, okay. So when they have what they call leadership group meetings, it's not just the captain and the alternates. I mean, that's not usually your leadership group is like 6 or 7 strong, right? So there's always 3 or 4 guys who are in a leadership group who don't even wear a letter. So what the hell's the difference? The whole point of the C and the A's is created by the league, and the premise of it is that those are the only people who are allowed to discuss an official's decision on the ice with an official. Now, over the years, that's kind of been, blurred a little bit. Like, yeah, they're supposed to be the guys, but there are other guys go out there and talk to officials. You always see it when they go over to the, officials are over at the penalty box and somebody goes over for an explanation. It does not really have to be the C or the A's. It's supposed to be, and majority of the time it is, but it doesn't have to be. But I mean, that's the whole purpose of the C's and the A's being on jerseys. It's the only reason. And we have blown it up, especially here in Philadelphia, but in other cities as well, to mean so much more than it really does. It really doesn't matter. You want to take the C off of Claude Giroux, take the C off of his sweater, he's still going to be a leader in the locker room. He's not going to be any different. So it's just kind of, it's a ceremonial thing more than anything else, and to strip it publicly is only a negative. But I mean, I don't think it in any way changes the way a guy is. It's not like suddenly if you took the C away from Giroux, he's going to be in the locker room and be like, yep, sorry guys, I'm not the captain. Don't talk to me. Hey, he's going to still be the same guy. That's the thing that's kind of asinine about this whole concept of giving it to someone else and stripping it away from him. It doesn't matter. Those players are going to still lead the team in the same way they do, regardless if they have a letter on their sweater or not.
Yeah, but I mean, like, okay, so let me play devil's advocate on that then. If it doesn't matter, then what does it matter if you hand it off to someone else? Like, what if handing off the C or the A's to, other young players kind of gives them a feeling of empowerment? It gives them, a feeling like an increased sense that they are, trusted to be leaders on this team. And if it ends up boosting them, mentally, then isn't that worth it? Like, don't you want to have some of those guys, in a spot where they feel like they really are part of, a cultural change in the locker room?
Yeah, you're not wrong. I mean, that could certainly be looked at that way, but I'll tell you that the opposite can also happen, because what the other effect of the letters on the sweater are how it affects the media, because and the writers immediately become sheep. Okay. And which again I don't understand, but the fact is that, oh well, he's the captain, we got to talk to him. I mean, it's a mentality. It's been going on for decades. It's not something new, but the mentality is that, oh well, we need answers to why the team's losing. Let's talk to the captain. Oh, let's talk to the alternate captains. They're the voices of the team. Well, okay. I mean, you don't have to. I mean, other players can have opinions too, besides the guys who have C's and A's. But at the same, so what ends up happening is if you put it on a young player's jersey too soon, I think what ends up happening is they're going to get peppered now with questions, and maybe they're not at a stage of their career yet where they are comfortable being the good person who has to answer for the entire team. I mean, I'll say this: like Ivan Provorov, not the greatest interview. I mean, he's kind of just mundane. I mean, he's not bad. Like, he's not terrible, but he doesn't really say anything that's going to excite you as a writer. I mean, he's not going to give you a great quote that you're going to sit there and say, "Oh yeah, let's build a story around that." He's just, he just says the cliches and. Gives you short answers, and he's not a big personality by any stretch of the imagination. Doesn't mean he can't be a good leader. He certainly could be a good leader, but he's not the guy that's going to come out and be, at least not yet. He's not the guy who's going to come out and say stuff to the media. But if you put a letter on his sweater, and they don't, people don't really talk to him a lot in the locker room. I mean, here and there. I mean, if he has if he's involved with something in the game, he scores a goal, or he's responsible for a turnover or something, then yeah, he's going to be requested, and he'll talk. But at the same time, I mean, he can go days, weeks without talking to the media. But if he's the captain, he's got to talk every day. And it's just the nature of it. And I laugh at it. I chuckle at it because it's the way that everybody's conditioned. It's kind of like we're conditioned to eat certain foods at certain times of the day. Like, oh, wow, you eat pancakes at breakfast. You don't eat it at lunch, or you can't eat a steak at 10 o'clock in the morning. Well, yeah, you can if you really want to. It doesn't make a difference. We're just conditioned to do it a certain way. And the media is conditioned to talk to the captain and the alternates as the leaders of the team to give explanations. It's silly. The whole concept of it is silly. So, can you give it to a younger player and say, yeah, here, take this leadership responsibility and run with it? Sure. But at the same time, you could also be adding undue pressure to a younger player. Let him get into the league. Let him learn everything about the league and play, and kind of do it in obscurity. I mean, that's really the case. Don't constantly force them to have to answer questions. And then they can get better that way. So that's why you want veterans more often than not being your captain and your alternates, because they've been around and they know how to handle the media a little bit better. So that really, you're looking at the only reasons that we even have captains and alternates in hockey, and it's for the referees and for the media. I mean, that's it. I mean, what other purpose does it serve to have those letters? I don't know.
So then let me kind of petition. Like, maybe it's just time to get rid of the C and the A's. The only two sports, honestly, the only two sports that really embrace it, and like if part of it is if part of the problem around it is, you feel like it's I don't know, that it's kind of it's used as a way to kind of create a wedge in the locker room, or at least like with the media, like it causes undue, I don't know, stress or spotlight or whatever. Like, the only two sports that do it are soccer and hockey. Right? Like football, in theory has captains. They send out, captains every game, right? And that can change. Baseball, like, the only guy that I can think of, what was his name? Was it Varitek, the catcher from the Red Sox? Like, he was the only one. Basketball doesn't have anybody wear the C. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, I don't, like, maybe it's just like time to pass it on. Like, maybe it's
silly.
I don't know. Like,
but there's a lot of silly in sports, and this is one of them. This is a silly tradition, and it just is. It exists because it's a silly tradition, and it's been a tradition for 100 years, and so that's the reason. I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, you can't do anything about it. Look, I don't buy it as far as from a media perspective. Like, I don't go into a situation if the Flyers lose a game or they've lost 6 in a row, and I need answers. I don't automatically assume I got to get them from Claude Giroux. He's not gonna say anything inflammatory. If anything else, I want to go sit in that locker room and talk to a younger player who's probably not trained to be as, give the media the pat answer that the team wants them to give. Like, that younger player might have a little bit more emotion, and that's the kind of guy that I'm going to seek out for a good quote. It's playing the game. You got to play the game on the media side too, as much as you do on the player side, and and that's I think that as media members, you earn respect from the players, the coaches, the team, the management, everybody, by doing your job the right way and in a professional manner, and even if that means you get somebody to say something that they probably shouldn't have said, you're not gonna get people mad at you as a writer for doing that. they might get mad at the player, but they respect the fact that you were able to, to cull that relationship with that player to get that comment. And so that therefore it becomes, you only improve yourself as a writer and as a member of the media. And that's why I think that the whole mentality of pack journalism is so bad. And you have it, and also, again, it's the worst in hockey. It's worse in hockey than any other sport, but it exists in other sports. I've been at Phillies games where we come back up from the locker room, and you have 6 writers saying, okay, I'll transcribe this, you transcribe that, and they all share it. Well, what, is this all about expediency? Is that all it is? Write your own stories, man. Don't rely on somebody else to give you the quote that you want. I mean, do your own work.
Speaking of people who give quotes, yeah. I want to kind of hit a few things. Maybe we'll kind of do like a quick roundup of some of these things. But Ron Hextall, he took flack because he more or less said that the fans don't know what they're talking about, that he certainly knows more about the coaching staff than the fans do, and the coaches know more about the players than the fans do, and the players know more about themselves than the fans do. So, the fans are lowest on the totem pole. He knows what he's doing. We don't at the end. Here's one troubling quote that I wanted to bring up with you. So we talked about on the last episode, you had to wonder what they were going to do with some of the guys that we didn't like, or maybe I didn't like to see them putting out on the ice in big roles. We know that Brandon Manning won't be back. We know that Valtteri Filppula is on, I don't know, he's like, the Flyers are in like a will he, won't he kind of scenario, where Hextall said if they can't upgrade the position, they'll look to bring him back. Or that was at least the inference. But the one that I thought was troubling was his quote on Jori Lehtera. I think at the end of the last episode, you said they absolutely should, or they probably will buy out Lehtera, and I said, no, Lehtera will probably be back. Maybe they'll give him the A, life will be great. So the quote was, you don't just buy out a guy because he makes more money than his role. The plan is to have him back now. I'm going to repeat that really quickly. You don't just buy a guy out because he makes more money than his role. Isn't that the entire point of a buyout? Isn't that why that's been negotiated into a CBA? Like, you're paying this guy more than he's worth, as it pertains to his role. You buy him out, you cut bait, and you say, thanks for your time, it's time to move on. Like, this to me, like, we talked about them being, tone deaf at points. This is stupid. Like, this is the epitome of stupid. You're telling me right now that you would rather continue to pay Jori Lehtera the hit that he's making against your cap, instead of either A, bringing up a younger player to replace him, B, finding somebody else on the free agent market who might be a lower cost alternative, who, might actually have some upside, or like C, shortening your bench just altogether, because it certainly has to be better than Jori Lehtera. I don't actually mean C. But like, this to me is just, I don't understand it. Can you make any sense of what Ron Hextall's intent was and what he said?
100%. And that's what, and this is perfect. This is a perfect example that this can kind of lead into his other comments about the fans. You're reactionary with this response. And that's perfectly right to react the way you did, because, you're not there. You're not thinking, from the business side of things. You're thinking as a fan, and you're sitting there saying, holy hell, this makes zero sense. You can't say, how can you suggest bringing Jori Lehtera back and after admitting that you're paying him more than he's worth is a good thing? Oh my God, this is crazy. This is asinine. And you're right. From a fan's perspective, you're 100% correct, Russ. But now let me tell you, I'm going to put on Ron Hextall's hat. I'm going to be the GM of the team. I need to get rid of Jori Lehtera, right? My preference is to not buy him out. And why is that? Because I don't want to have dead cap money. We already have dead cap money because we're paying, Ilya Bryzgalov $1 point some million every year. You don't want to keep adding to dead cap money. Okay, so you sit there and say, no, our plan isn't to get rid of him. Our plan is to keep him on the roster for now, right? You have to say that publicly, because if you come out and say, yeah, well, we're thinking about buying him out. If you say that, all of a sudden there's zero value. Right, another team's going to sit there and say, well, if we want to bring in Jori Lehtera, then we just wait for the Flyers to buy him out, and then we can sign him for the veteran minimum, and then he's on the roster. And so nobody will trade with you at that point. Now, I can tell you with 100% certainty that at several times during the season, Ron Hextall, tried to move Jori Lehtera, especially early. I mean, he was trying to move him as early as like November, and got no bites. Now, I'm not saying that Lehtera's performance suddenly is now makes him any more attractive to other teams, but the one thing that Lehtera did show that he can do is he did show that he could play a little bit of a fourth line role. As much as we didn't,
I was
like
going
him
to say he can make it look like he's skating in molasses. Sorry, go ahead.
No, well, as much as we didn't like him as a player here, and I never got it. I never understood why he was there. I mean, teams are always looking for alternatives for the fourth line, especially if you get a veteran guy who maybe they're not going to score, but they can give you something from a defensive side of things. And Lehtera, to his credit, I mean, yes, he's slow, but he wasn't god-awful defensively as a forward. He had mistakes. He couldn't keep up with guys, but in his zone was actually kind of a, okay player. He was a decent penalty killer. I mean, he wasn't the worst. He wasn't the best, but he was okay. So there are things to his game that you sit there and say, well, maybe we can get somebody to take part of this contract. Like if you eat part of the contract and then get somebody to take the other part of the contract, then it helps that way. And now you're not looking at, putting a buyout on your cap hit for the next 4 years or whatever the case might be. So there's a reason Hextall has to say publicly that they're not getting rid of him right now because he's under contract. So if you diminish his value publicly, then you're stuck with it, right? So unless he was absolutely 100% planning on buying him out, and then he could have said that. But if he's trying to come up with an alternative, and that's why the more important words in what he said, rather than he's not being paid, or he's being paid. What was the exact quote?
And the plan, I closed it out. It was you don't buy out a player because he makes more money than the role that he serves
right.
on the team.
Makes more than right. You don't buy out a player because he makes more money than the role. But rather, the more important, none of that is the important comment. The important comment is for now. That's the important words in what he said, and I'll tell you that's what you have to look for when coaches and managers speak. Those words tell you a lot more about their mindset than anything else any drivel that they're spitting out.
Well, he also
says, for now, he means as of this moment he's on the team and we're planning on using him. There's still a lot of time before the season starts.
He also called Lehtera a good role player for us, and he's really good with our young kids. So that's cute.
It's the same thing he's putting out there. And I know.
Yeah,
to defend him.
Yeah, he's like, I get it.
He's trying to paint a picture to say, you know what? Maybe somebody out there that
is
a rebuilding team.
Yep.
Yeah, we'll take this guy on, and look, we'll even pay part of his contract. He'll be good for you. I mean, that's what he's trying to say publicly. I mean, in all honesty, that's what he's saying.
It's sweet. Okay, so Jori was part of a massive shakeup trade. I think it's fair to say. Last year, I think it's fair. Maybe this is the last thing we can get to right now, but I think it's important that we kind of review that trade. A year later, the Brayden Schenn trade that netted Jori Lehtera, the pick that became Morgan Frost, correct? Mm-hmm. And now, because the Blues did not end up in the top 3 in the draft lottery, it netted the Flyers the 14th overall pick in this year's draft. So as we kind of pull away from this, bigger picture, recapping this deal, did it work out for the Flyers? Was the trade worth it?
Well, I mean, ultimately we won't know for still another couple years. I mean, you got to wait and see what Morgan Frost becomes. You got to wait and see what whoever is drafted at 14 becomes, or if they use that pick to move up in the draft or potentially trade for a player. So there's all kinds of possibilities. So ultimately, we can't really decide what the outcome of this trade is, probably for another 2-3 seasons. I still think it's a win because I look at it as these are really good assets that the Flyers got in return for a streaky player who scores goals at times that are not real big. I mean, he's not a big-time goal scorer. Like, he doesn't score at the biggest moments. He scores a lot of goals when the game is not close. And he's very incredibly streaky. I mean, you saw it this year. He got off to an incredible start and then went right off the cliff and didn't have. I mean, at the end of the year, you look at Schenn's numbers and say, "Oh, well, the Flyers could have used those numbers." Yeah, but when did those numbers occur? I mean, they were all the first half of the season. He did nothing down the stretch. He could barely score down the stretch. So, I take Lehtera out of the equation. I think that was the Flyers just taking on salary to get the second first-round pick out of St. Louis. And then it worked out that the Blues, who were expected to be a good team, didn't make the playoffs. So the Flyers end up getting a lottery pick out of the deal. The trade couldn't have gone better. Now, these players, Morgan Frost specifically, and then whoever's coming this year,
let's make sure that we refer to Morgan Frost appropriately. 112 points, Morgan Frost.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean the kid had an incredible year in the OHL, and he's going to be a Phantom next year. There's no question. It looks good. Like right now, it looks good to me. We'll see. I mean, it's gonna have to, time will tell. Ultimately, what it's going to be, but at the same time, it's a good trade. Brayden Schenn is not a great player. He's an okay player, but to get 2 first-round picks out of Brayden Schenn is huge. I think it couldn't get any better. And I'll throw, just for the sake right now, I'll tell you that there's one player that I think that the Flyers really like, and he's an American kid, Joel Farabee. Remember this name. We'll tuck it away here on May 3rd, and then we'll talk in 6 weeks when the draft rolls around. The name that I hear, he's a left wing. His name is Joel Farabee. He's playing on the U.S. National Development Team. I think the Flyers like him a lot. He just turned 18 in February, and he's in like an all situations kind of forward. I think that they kind of look at him as a guy who can, be a top 6 kind of guy and also kill penalties and play power play and be that two-way forward on the wing. So I think that having the luxury of having 2 first-round picks, you might be able to look at that and say, okay, let's see where Farabee is. Is he a kid that we can get at 14, or is he someone we have to move up a couple spots and make a trade and something like that? So, I mean, there's a lot of options that Hextall has, and those options are great because of the trade of Brayden Schenn. So, I mean, I think it's a win right off the bat. It's a win.
Okay, so really quick before we go, and I think this is maybe something that we'll get into more next week. Yeah. The potential now that you have, what is it, 14 and 18, or is it 14 and 19?
14 and 19.
You've got two solid first round picks. You've got young pieces that we don't know how long it's going to take them to potentially hit the big club. Potentially we could be looking at trades going down around the draft for legitimate veteran contributors and guys who can actually push the needle. Now, will they be able to get the Flyers closer to that Pittsburgh level? Maybe not, but it'll at least give them a fighting chance against teams within their division and within the conference. And who knows? Like maybe if you go out and you pair a free agent signing and a big trade for a vet, like I don't know, anything's possible, right? Kevin Garnett once said anything is possible. I think we'll probably get to that next week. Before we go, there are 2 new 5-star iTunes reviews. Unless there's anything else you want to hit really quick.
Well, the only other thing I really wanted to touch on from last week was Hextall saying the fans don't know what they're talking about. And just briefly, I want to defend him, if you don't mind.
Go ahead, quick.
Yeah, quick. I know we got to go. Like you got to go work.
This is my problem. This is my morning problem. This is all my fault. It's all my fault. All right, go ahead. Defend Ronald Jeffrey.
Yeah. He's not wrong, and that's not a knock on fans. It's that fans think they know more now than we ever did. And I remember being a fan before I was a writer, and I thought I knew a lot. But I mean, I didn't have the information at my disposal that fans have today, and I thought I knew a lot then. So the mentality of the fan has not changed over the years. The mentality of the fan is still the same, except that now you have more information at your disposal, which makes you sound smarter. But ultimately, Hextall's right. man. Like the fans don't know about certain things going on with players. They don't know about behind the scenes stuff. And hockey's really good at hiding things, and maybe almost better than any other sport is. So, it's okay for a fan to have an opinion. I don't ever knock a fan for having an opinion, but sometimes you have to realize that the opinion that you have might be a little bit misguided. And for Hextall to say that publicly kind of surprised me, but he's not wrong. So I'm going to defend the fact that he knows a little bit more about what he's doing than maybe the fans want to admit. But at the same time, he probably shouldn't have said what he said because that's not good publicity.
Ron Hextall hates the fans. What are some things you hate? 610-632. Okay.
And I hate headlines. Can I tell you that as a writer, I hate headlines. And people think that the writers write the headline, and although I tend to do it on Crossing Broad because Kyle's never available, but we try to. Writers rarely write their own headlines, so they're usually written by somebody else who's just reading the story. So don't ever take it out on the writer for the headline.
Okay, real quick.
We got your 5-star reviews.
2 5-star podcast reviews on iTunes / Apple Podcasts. Don't forget. If you like the show, which of course you do because you're listening, make sure to go on to iTunes. Use someone else's iPhone if you must, or their computer. Get onto iTunes, leave a 5-star review. Not just the rating. We love the rating, but we also love the review because we like to hear from you. First one is by EagsRock20. Good Flyers podcast, 5 stars. Glad they put this in a separate... glad they put this in a separate, I guess that's supposed to be podcast, so Anthony and Russ can have intelligent conversations about the Flyers without Kyle bursting in every 5 seconds to make some sex joke. It's also much better than the incessant and frankly incoherent ramblings of BSH Radio. Ooh, shots fired. Scotty Mack, the ghost of Kate Smith, 5 stars. Finally, I look forward to listening to these guys each week. Intelligent, level-headed Flyers talk that is much needed in this town. Well, big thank you to EagsRock20 and to Scotty Mack. And, of course, as always, don't forget to go on to iTunes, leave a 5-star review, and we'll read it on the next show.
I didn't realize Kyle made a lot of sex jokes when it came to hockey. I'm sorry. We should have him as a guest just to see if he does. Don't tell him that's why we're having him on. Just have him on, and then we'll have an over/under on sex jokes and see how many there are.
All right, that might. Oh boy, it's going to go from being this is a nice show that you can listen to in the car. Very, very limited profanity. It only comes from you if it ever happens, and it's. Well, I don't curse on these podcasts.
I try not to either. I mean, I don't
actually think you did this entire episode.
That's the professional in me, right? I try not to curse at all. Yeah,
I'm just so proud. I'm so proud to do this show with you every week.
This is podcasting for the entire family here.
This is. It's the best. # Snow the Goalie.